Welcome back to the online extended version of the county seat. We are talking about indigent defense. Again, if you are just tuning into this portion of our extended program, our guests are Jared Eldridge, who's Juab County Attorney, Darcy Goddard, who's the Legal Director of the ACLU of Utah, and Richard Morrow, who is on the Supreme Court Task Force on Indigent Defense and a lot of other things, right? You know, we kind of wrapped this up in our last conversation about the, I mean, I think the biggest point, Darcy, you left with us is that there is no state funding and there's only one other state. Do we know who that other bad boy is that's not doing any state
Pennsylvania.
Funding? The only other place I've lived in my life. It's is it feasible that I mean, do you think that that the legislature is ducking responsibility by not funding this in some fashion or another?
Well, I don't know if the legislature is ducking responsibility, but I mean, there's two sort of general models, and you know, Jared and I started out together at the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association, which is the Salt Lake County Public Defender Association. Mm-hmm. We were salaried lawyers. We worked full-time on criminal defense issues. We had in-house training and a training program that we went through to learn how to do these cases. There was oversight through a chain of command at the office, and that office produces very superb criminal defense lawyers. That's one model that exists.
And is that funded by the county?
It's funded by Salt Lake County, yes. And can that model work on a statewide level? I suppose it could. It's probably the best model in some ways because you know what your costs are going to be. You know how many lawyers you need. You know what your budget's going to be generally. And those sorts of things are better controlled. Now, do you put it in control of the state or a region? That's certainly a decision that needs to be made by policymakers.
How would you feel with that as a county attorney? Would you feel that the scope of authority for the county had been usurped in some fashion or another?
As a county attorney, not necessarily. I wouldn't feel that way. I think that as a prosecutor, I'm concerned with seeing that justice is carried out. You know, if that means that that 5 guilty people go free, well, what's the saying? I mean, we don't want to convict an innocent person.
Sure.
That's our concern. Yeah. And we want to make sure that that there's adequate defense, that people get a fair representation, and they get their day in court. You know, we want to see that justice is served. You know, how that's carried out and whether the county pays for that or the legislature pays for that, you know, I'm going to leave that for other people to debate.
Okay.
And from our perspective, I think that a statewide office is one option, and a number of states have done it, and they've done it very successfully. That said, I think Utah is probably unlikely in the near term to either allocate the money for it or sort of create the infrastructure that would be necessary to make that happen. But what I do think could happen relatively easily is regional offices or pooling arrangements between counties where there is some sort of subsidy from the state to recognize its own constitutional obligation to make sure that indigent defense is provided in a way that is competent and complies with the Constitution.
Okay, you could use a funding model where, I mean, but you know, you could get back to the jail funding thing where, okay, we'll establish a pool that can be distributed to the counties or to groups of counties to help cover the fluctuating costs of indigent defense, and then they could traditionally and continually underfund it by, you know, 70–80%. I'm not trying to pick on any legislators here, but you know, there's a history on this topic, and so you could run into that problem. But even if you were to get that funding worked out, how do you address the standards of conduct about the caseloads and stuff like that? Because somewhere, if there's that much disparity in how counties are functioning with this, and people's defense is being compromised, how do you address that? Is that a legislative thing? Is that a Utah Association of Counties or a Utah Association of County Attorneys thing? Where would that standard come from, and how would it be applied?
One of the things that we've done in the appellate level is recommended a rule to the Supreme Court that establishes a committee of lawyers and judges, and you can make application to undertake and represent indigent people on appeals. You're appointed, you're on the committee, you serve in the committee, you have to have certain training, certain experience as a lawyer, certain continuing legal education on a yearly basis, and then your briefs and your performance are reviewed by this committee every second year. And so there is it's a small model, but it is a model that encompasses all the things that I think are important.
Okay, Jared, you're nodding your head.
Well,
there, so
and you know, that's a good approach on the appellate representation, and I think that we all agree that was a good step in the right direction. And you know, I'm interested in this discussion because I've had this discussion with other county attorneys about how do we set those minimum qualifications? How do we? I mean, I don't know if that same fix is going to work on the trial level as it will on the appellate level. And you know, I'm interested in carrying on a dialogue about how do we set those minimum qualifications and police, or you know, qualify public defenders as, you know, this group here is a good group to choose from, who's going to provide a competent, constitutionally adequate defense. This group is questionable. You know, where do we draw that line? How do we
Darcy,
do
you
that?
had something you wanted to say.
Well, I think that I agree. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction for appellate work. I think that it's great to set minimum standards, minimum qualifications, X number of years in practice, X number of trials. That's great. But I think on the trial level, you have to have more day-to-day oversight of individual public defenders in order to make sure that they are actually providing effective representation, constitutionally adequate representation to their client. It isn't something where there's a work product at the end, a brief, where someone can sit back in an office and review it. It's something that involves day-to-day interactions with law enforcement and with county attorneys and with judges, and balancing sometimes as many as 300 different cases on your docket. And that's not something you can look at every 2 years and from a distance. That needs to be more concrete and hands-on. And whether, again, it's a statewide office or whether it's regional offices, where then not only do you have an oversight mechanism by region, but you also have the kind of training and support staff that Rich was talking about that he got at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association, which is so important to developing skills as a young lawyer and to develop the knowledge of how to be an effective criminal defense attorney.
Would the possibility of having like a 2-year internship program that regionally trains people in an office like Salt Lake, say you would cluster Washington County and Iron County and Millard and Beaver together in one group, and say they would jointly pool, or the state would fund an office that would represent in that area, and they would go through that process for a couple of years till they got the training, and then they could move out and still end up on a county docket to fill the voids. But you would have, I mean,
That might solve the initial training problem, but you're still going to have the problem of, if they're not compensated well enough once they're out in the individual counties, they're still going to have a private
right,
practice, and there's no conflict screen in place.
Here's the next question that comes out, Darcy.
Okay.
Who oversights the oversight?
What do you
Because
mean?
That's a good point. I mean, that's a good point.
Because that will become an issue. People will say, that oversight committee, the people that are handling indigent defense, has developed an agenda of their own. I mean, I hear that conversation coming, and in some cases, I doubt it would happen in this case, but in some cases, those very things happen. The very oversight committees start developing their own agendas, and they aren't functioning without politics anymore.
Sure.
And that's what you have to avoid, particularly when you're on anything that's on the judicial side of the balance of power. You've got to do that. So how do you oversight the oversight? I mean,
Well, a way to avoid it is to set up individual county offices like Salt Lake County did. But I will tell you that, at least in talking with county attorneys in smaller counties, they've said, I don't have enough of a criminal docket to warrant setting up an office. But they might if they pooled in with other counties and set up an office.
so if you were to build a unified, I look in Salt Lake County and in all the municipalities, they've put a unified police department together through the sheriff's office. They have a unified fire department, maybe a unified defense group or
Well,
something,
sure.
or
I mean,
defense association for counties. Would JUAB do something like that if you could?
You know, I think it's worth some discussion to talk about some kind of pooling agreement where you might pool together with some other counties. You know, what works in Salt Lake County may not necessarily work in San Juan County or in JUAB County or in, you know, some of these other more rural counties, because the criminal caseload is different. And you know, the Salt Lake model is certainly a great model. And what some of these other counties have in place isn't necessarily broken either. And I think we need to make sure we don't lose that idea. Can it be improved? Sure. There are some areas where we can certainly improve, and that's partly why we've had this discussion, and why the county attorneys are talking with the ACLU, and Rich Morrows represents criminal defense lawyers across the state, and why we're participating on the indigent task force, that we have a representative who's also on that from the county attorneys.
Okay, well, this has been great dialogue. I encourage everybody at home, if you've been watching this, talk about it. If you get any good ideas, call these guys, because obviously this is a situation that there's a lot of different points of view, and they need to try on a lot of different things to find the system that works. Thank you for joining us for the Dialogue on the County Seat. Always, you can look for us on Sunday mornings, 8 o'clock on ABC4 for a new episode of the County Seat. We'll see you later.